All right, everybody. Well, welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. And this in episode 1, we were talking about live stream and live stream setups, from the most simplest setups to the most complicated, and kind of what those look like. This week, we're actually going to be jumping into audio for live stream, and we're really excited to get into that. Both Michael and I are kind of audio snobs, so to speak. Would you say that, Michael?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would.
But before we jump into that, if this is your first time listening to the Parkway Powerful Ideas podcast, and you don't know what Parkway is about, well, we just want to share a little bit about who we are and what we do. Todd, would you mind filling in the listeners on Parkway a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. If you missed our first episode, we talked a little bit about who we are, but just to recover some things. So Parkway is a large, both electrical and communications contractor. We have about 130 employees. Of that, about 40 or 50 are in the communications department. And you will find us just about everywhere. Of course, where the three of us mostly exist is in the high-end audio and video and lighting realm. But you will find our company doing card access systems and lighting and security, camera systems, cabling for computer networks, just about everywhere in both, churches, schools, colleges, universities, entertainment. You'll find us all across the industry. So, like I said, most of our experience here is being geared towards churches and houses of worship and what's happening out there. But we certainly get into a lot of different things.
Yeah, doing things like airports and hotels, like kind of all over the map. And so for any needs that any of our listeners may have, reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation about your project and what you got going on. But yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Todd. Today, we're going to jump into audio for live stream specifically, not for mixing to a live room. And last week, we talked about 3 different tiers of live streaming. The first was something simple, just like we are doing for this podcast, where it's just your laptop camera, laptop microphone and speakers, or maybe you're using a secondary camera like a Mevo that will stream wirelessly over Wi-Fi directly to something like Facebook Live. Now, a lot of people are just using their phone or their iPads or their laptop. But one of the things I would say about getting better audio quality for that type of setup would be to maybe get something like this, like all 3 of us have a microphone with an audio interface. If you can't afford an audio interface, which is basically a box that will take pro audio connections and put it into your computer so that you can use it with Zoom or Google Hangouts, Facebook Live, etc. But if you can't afford an audio interface, they do make microphones that will plug straight into a laptop over USB. And so that right away will give you a little bit more of a closeness so that people can hear the clarity of your voice versus being back here like in a room. You could still hear me, but you hear the room. You might hear the dog barking, the kids playing and crying. But it'll just bring a little bit more clarity. And so that would be my recommendation if all you're doing is Zoom or some sort of hangout like that, or Facebook Live. And if you're using a Mevo camera, there is a way for you to connect your audio console to the Mevo. They do make this iRig that you can find online. You can contact us to help you connect your console mix or your audio console for your live room to your live stream. We would love to be able to walk you through that process as well. But that's kind of what I would say for a simple setup like that. Is there anything that you guys would add to that?
I guess I would just ask the question. So in that simple solution, do you recommend just connecting, if it's a novice user and you do try to connect your console to get some more of your inputs you're doing, would you just take the same mix that you're sending to your speakers, or would you develop it like off an aux or a matrix?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Michael, why don't you, I have some thoughts on that, but why don't you share what you would think?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, if you're moving past just a USB microphone, that tells me that you are introducing more people because you're going to be using more microphones and more inputs, which kind of steps you into the next tier. There is a lot of people that are still using analog consoles,
Hmm.
and we can talk about that for a minute. There is people using uh, aux mixes to send to their broadcast. I think you'll see that a lot in the analog realm. I do remember running this is becoming a few and far between now. I mean, a lot more people are using digital consoles, but I do remember running a worship event. This might have been 2007 when I was hired with this band to come in and do a worship conference, and I had the assistant engineer from the house actually reaching over my shoulder the whole time and turning aux buttons.
Mm.
And
Wonderful.
it
Bet you that
was
was enjoyable.
it was quite an experience.
Yeah.
I found halfway through I got a little frustrated with him.
Yeah.
But that's what they were doing. They had an analog board. I was mixing for house, and he was mixing the recording feed to a camera and on aux buses. And that's how they accomplished that. He was listening to headphones,
Mm.
and that's one simple way that you can integrate a mix into another feed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think using a matrix is absolutely can be the best way. If you're, especially if you're in Michael's case, in that scenario, he was worried about front of house and the live experience, and there was somebody else on headphones. But a lot of you are not going to have that. A lot of you are going to be mixing for your live event. Probably not at this moment during COVID, but normally you'd be mixed for your live event, and then you also have to worry about the online mix, and you're kind of trying to manage those two. And so an easy way to be able to use your live mix is just to send it over a matrix, connect that matrix to your left, right, out console, out of your console, and you're off to the races. But it can get tricky. Audio for video, audio for live streaming or broadcast can be an interesting thing to tackle because it's not always one-to-one. What sounds good live doesn't always sound good on
Recorded.
video. Right, recorded, absolutely. And a lot of things play into that. Number one is the quality of the sound system that you're mixing through. Number two, the live stage noise that you have. So if you don't have a drum cage and you have a loud drummer, you're getting a lot of that ambient noise live, and so you're mixing to that. But when you go to the live stream, you don't have that same large sound. All of a sudden everything gets really, really kind of one-dimensional. And so there's a lot of things to think about when you're doing broadcast. I know, Michael, you do broadcast audio mixing for your church on Sundays. And so why don't we dive into that a little bit and talk a little bit about when we go to tier 2, where we're using a camera, we're using some sort of service to stream out to various places for our live stream. And then we want to use some sort of a secondary mix. We can either jump into that, or we could also jump into what it looks like to get that matrix console mix off the live console to sound the best that it can. But why don't you start to dive into that a little bit for us?
Right. So if you're using a matrix to send out to a broadcast mix, one of the things that you got to think about, who's your end user? I think that's a basic that we need to cover. Most of the people that are listening to iPhones, iPads, computer speakers, devices that do not replicate low end very well.
Right.
And
You
they're
mean my computer speakers aren't as good as the ones in my church?
Not at all. So what they do accentuate is the voice. So a lot of these devices are engineered for voice. which means if you have a group of 5 singers, for example, and you're trying to mix that with a band, and you got it blended right for your house, most likely that those vocals are going to be way too loud on those little speakers.
Right.
So there is, I mean, we get into a little bit of mix theory here, but knowing who your end user is one of the key important factors in knowing how to broadcast mix. The other thing is bands have way more dynamic range than a voice, like a pastor. So balancing music and speech is the other key to broadcast mixing. And that can be done through your matrix. You can send your left and right feed, and then you could also send maybe an aux send to that matrix where you can turn the speech groups up
Yes.
a little louder than the music, or vice versa, turn the music down, and balance those two so that the user doesn't have to turn their volume up and down all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah, because a lot of us will experience that. The music is so loud and it sounds great, and but then the person who's coming to do the announcements or preach a message, all of a sudden is like, and it like so much lower, and then they got to increase their volume, or they feel like they don't have enough volume anymore on their laptop speakers. It's like they have it all the way up and it still sounds really low. That's a really great tip, Michael.
Right. And it's going to be very much contrasted from a live event where obviously if you put a speaker or a pastor at the same volume as a band, you're going to be killing people.
Right.
You just can't do it.
Right.
You may be mixing the band at 95 to 98 dB, whereas your pastor is going to come on at 85,
Yeah.
and be plenty loud. So that's quite a contrast. Every 6 dB is twice less than volume. So
just so everyone's following our role here a little bit, tier 2 Christian really is what we're saying is someone that's beginning to use their front of house console to do both, not during COVID. Obviously during COVID right now, we don't have people in the church, so we're not mixing for a congregation. But when this is all over, we will be. And I believe that a lot of people are going to stick with their streaming, which is what they've been doing now. So now you have a front of house guy that is mixing potentially 2 different things. I know that when we started at our church, you guys know, just to review with our audience, we were kind of a basic user at our church. So we had a camera. We were streaming basically for the handful of snowbirds that went down to Florida in the winter. And there's maybe 8 or 10 people. And then all of a sudden, within a week, we jumped to 500 or 600 people. Yeah. So we used to basically not monitor what we were sending to our stream at all. And all of a sudden, we started monitoring it like crazy. And like you said, Michael, one of the things that jumped out to me immediately was that when I listened to that, went home and listened to it on my computer, the vocals were like, it was so much different than live. I mean, the vocals just, you couldn't hear anything else on the stream. It was all
interesting.
It was all vocal at home. And, it's just a huge difference. This is the first thing I noticed right away. The difference in the vocal. But anyway, tier 2 is that guy trying to do both of those things.
Right.
I know tier 3, we'll get in here too. We may want to just touch on that. So we got those tiers covered, but
I think you touched on an important point though, knowing your audience. 8 people, you're not going to invest a ton of money as a church into a major live stream broadcast system. Those people are important, of course, but you're not dealing with a church of 600 online every week, where it becomes more of a pastoral, okay, now we got a small church that we're streaming to,
So maybe before we jump into all that technical stuff, what is tier 3, Christian?
Yeah, so tier 3 is when you kind of have a full-blown production studio, so to speak, where you have multiple cameras, multiple video inputs, kind of overlays, lower thirds for your video, and then your audio for that video is has a separate mix. So you either have a secondary audio console in a back room somewhere with some speakers that somebody's mixing live in real time, but they're mixing specifically for the web, and they're not in the room where the band is playing. So you start to cater to that same sort of listener that's going to be listening on online or at home on a TV. And there's a few ways that you kind of approach how you do audio for this. But that's in essence what it is. It's a separate audio mix from a console or even digitally through a DAW, a digital audio workstation. And that's what you do every week, correct, Michael?
Yes. Yeah, we have a separate broadcast studio that's designed specifically for audio mixing.
And I think you made a good point, Michael. This is the church. That has decided that this is a ministry for them. Online is a ministry they're serving, not just to cater to a few people who can't be there that week, but the church has made this a point of their ministry, that they're ministering to people online.
There was a point at which, when we were growing this live stream, where the pastor was asking, well, how many people are streaming? He wanted to know that information, of course. And, we had I think it was like 250, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't people. That was IP addresses.
Mm-hmm.
So we implemented a drop-down menu before you could hit live stream on the web. And this goes into web design, but not really our topic today. But basically it said how many people are watching from this device.
Yeah, I've done that before. I've logged in to where it's like, how many people are actually going to watch this with you today?
Right.
Yeah.
And that count went from 250 up to like 500. I mean, it immediately doubled, because you got a family of 3, 4, 5, all watching the service. Now you're counting people, So yeah, I mean.
So this just brings up a question I didn't think of before. So when do you recall when you made that jump? I mean, maybe a lot of our listeners are wondering, well, okay, how many? And every church probably is going to have to make this decision on their own, or whether they want to make that a ministry going on, further from here now or not. But what was that number for your church? Do you recall that you went from tier 2 to tier 3? Do you remember?
So I have to give you a little backstory first before we can really determine that. So initially, and we're talking 2005, when I walked into the building and was hired by the church, we had a separate broadcast mixing studio, and it was 3 Yamaha O2Rs all linked together through Maddie.
Oh,
wow. All done in Logic, I believe, back then.
Okay.
And I got hired in, and this is not to really downplay what that was a volunteer position as well. So you were dealing with one person that came in once a week for a couple of hours and recorded the audio for broadcast. Well, now you have a paid professional audio engineer that walks in the room, and our front of house mix actually was far superior than our broadcast mix. So we actually kind of turned a corner and started going down just using front of house for the broadcast. Then we had some leadership changes, and that leader wanted to step up the production of not only audio but video, because we believe in planting campuses and independent campuses with their own pastors and creating their own network. And he wanted the church kind of to be up to par technology wise. And that's kind of the time when we implemented stepping up the broadcast audio mix. And prior to that, I was doing the online mix from front of house for probably a good 5-6 years. And we had a digital console, so I was able to use plugins. I was able to process the back end of that mix for the best that I could for video.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, both Ridgepoint and Engedi did the same thing while I was on staff with them. With Engedi, most recently, it was really because they were going to go multi-site. They were going to go multi-campuses, and so they knew that good audio over video was going to be crucial for that. And so that's when they made the jump as well. So it's really it's really hinges on the vision of the leadership of the
Right.
organization. You know, that's really where it all starts. If they want to go down the, because I know large churches that still don't live stream. You know,
Sure.
they just choose not to. And another interesting thing is like a church like Hillsong. Hillsong does not live stream. You know, you have to like, now they have like the channel on TV, and you have to become like a member, or you have to pay like a monthly fee or something like that. But even them, for the longest time, like if you're trying to find them online, like on a Sunday, like you can't find them. You know, like Hillsong New York City, for example. Like I've never even seen what their room looks like during worship. So that's a great question, Todd, about like when do you make that choice of like, we're going to go forward with this?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I'm even interested in my own church of where we end on this, you know. And I think there's going to be a lot of churches, and there's some that have stepped everything up with equipment as well. They've made some purchases to improve their stream because they had to.
Yeah,
well, the affordability of consoles now is a huge factor.
It'll just be interesting.
You can get 2 digital consoles for pretty cheap, you know.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, technology is incredible. Well, let's jump into that a little bit, Michael. Like, let's say we're going to build a broadcast mix because, you know, on some consoles, you know, let's talk about, I guess a lower tier console, where, you know, we're talking about your Behringers, your Yamahas, your Allen and Heats, like more entry level consoles, versus something that, like an SSL. That's going to be your high quality, or your Midas, or your Digico. But then you can also add SoundGrid and Wave plugins, right? To really up the ante and really get that professional sound, studio sound. But why don't we start with just some good practices for, regardless of the console that you're using, if you're using a secondary console or software to create a separate mix for your live stream. What are some good practices? Where are some good places to start?
Well, I think it's important to be separated from the room. If you're doing a separate broadcast mix, you want a studio environment. So you have 2 options to monitor that audio. One is headphones, the other is studio monitors. I personally like to have the studio monitors. I think it gives you a better representation of what you're trying to put out. But one of the more important things is to be monitoring on a device such as your laptop, such as your iPhone. Maybe you do a test stream during a rehearsal, and you have your laptop next to you, and you keep referencing back and forth. I do that quite a bit.
Yep.
Whenever I'm doing a live broadcast, I have my laptop open with the live stream on, and you know, I'll mute my console during a part where I know that the mix is going to stay that way for 16 bars or whatever. And I'll turn my computer speakers on and just listen during the live event. And that gives me a reference to what people are hearing on the other end. So I think that's a critical practice. Monitoring your levels is another huge thing. You know, balancing music and speech is probably the biggest thing that I pay attention to.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about that and how you can navigate that with an aux on your matrix. But how would you navigate that on a separate mix, Michael?
Well, you're gonna set your gain separately, and that kind of gets into gain sharing a little bit. In our situation, a lot of these consoles, one console takes gain structure, the other has digital trim, and that's your input volume going in, or your input amplification. A lot of times, I'll gain up my speaker mics a lot more than what you would at front of house.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Are you using the same console you're using at front of house?
We are. We have 2 Avid S6Ls,
So they're identical.
and we share a stage rack.
So one of the things, being an old guy here again, I was just thinking about how easy this is today. I mean, 20 years ago, 15, I don't know. That was a whole mess of cable and a lot of mic splitters.
Right.
Just splitting everything.
And now it's a piece of Cat 6.
Well, now you can take pretty much any console. You can either have the own proprietary split by the manufacturer, or there's Dante. A lot of people are using Dante. You can take actually a Dante card, put it in your front of house console. Granted, you have a digital console, of course, and send those splits to a DAW on a computer if you wanted to.
Yep.
And mix on a screen.
Yes, that's what we actually did at Engedi is we used a recording studio. So it doubled as a recording studio and a place to do the broadcast mix. And we would use plugins for everything. So we had every plugin imaginable, and we would create. So on a Sunday morning, we wouldn't even record. Normally you open up your DAW to record music, but we would just open a session, hit the turn on the inputs, and then everything's running through the plugins, and it's just passing through and then going out into your live stream. And so just like you said, you could use software. You don't even need a console. But most churches, Todd, I think that's great. The ones that I've been a part of, they do use the same console at front of house and in the broadcast mix, but you don't have to do that. But sometimes it just makes it easier. Things play well together when you use the same and you kind of standardize the brand and the console.
There's familiarity between volunteers.
That's true too. Yes.
So you can kind of swap people back and forth if you need to.
It sounds to me that the more important part of the equation, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but because I know with a lot of the digital consoles, at least for entry level, you could actually, a lot of them have an iPad app where you could actually be making adjustments to that house console from a location not inside the sanctuary. And that might, so from what I'm hearing you say is that putting somebody else in another room monitoring really what's going to the live stream is probably more important than what they're actually mixing on.
Correct. I would agree with that statement.
As far as a step one, you got to get them in a different room. They have to be monitoring that stream on a regular basis, that audio stream. Making adjustments for the audience, not so much, So getting them out of the sanctuary is probably more important than getting the same exact console, right?
Putting them in their hole. Get in your hole.
Right. Another thing, too, that I heavily rely on is when I'm doing broadcast mix, I have a live program feed of what's going to the web, video-wise. And I'm following along with those guys. If they show a guitar solo, I want to bump that up a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
So
that's a great point. Yeah, it's
very
more
revealing.
You're also following the band. So a lot of the mixing concepts that we would say that you would do at front of house, where it's like, hey, you don't just set the faders and walk away, right? Because music is dynamic. There's a guitar solo. There's a drum intro. The lead instrument on this song was an acoustic, but the lead instrument at the beginning of the next song is a piano. So we have to shift, right, according to where the band goes and where this music goes. Same thing for video. You got to have that video reference and follow where the band is still going. I think that's a great point, Michael.
Yeah, and I had this conversation with our video guys too, because it goes the other direction. Like if I'm mixing something and they hear it, they actually will cut the camera to it.
Yeah, nice.
So it is a back and forth following,
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of times when we integrate a new system, video and audio split, I like to stick them in the same room. You know, because the video guys can benefit from that mixer being in that room. And we're talking small scale here, in the larger facilities, you're going to have a separate studio for your audio only and your separate studio for your video engineering and all that.
Yeah.
But in a smaller setup, it's nice to have the guys that are running the cameras, calling the shots, have the studio monitors use a dual purpose, for the video guys and for the broadcast mixer.
Yeah, and I think the point is too, you don't have to go, this can all be done in steps,
Yeah.
And the
Right.
steps really can be quite affordable. If you come out of this COVID thing as a church that didn't do live stream before and you've found an audience, well, first of all, thank God for that, right?
Yeah.
You found somebody in your
Yeah.
in your community somewhere that's listening to what you're doing, that ain't walking into your building, and that's a great thing to have. And it can be a simple thing to do. I mean, it's amazing to me. I know we're not really talking video, but you give a guy a little remote control and a couple of PTZs up on the wall, and
Yeah.
you can
You're
do a
good to
pretty
go,
good
baby.
job for
You're up.
not a whole lot of money, really.
No,
It's
no, it
amazing
really
what,
isn't.
what you can do it for. And then,
Right.
like I
Yeah,
say, if you have a digital console, there's ways of creating a mix without having to put a whole nother console in, or even just a
Absolutely.
smaller console.
Well, and I love the point that you brought up because you can create a separate aux mix with an iPad and have somebody else navigate that. And that can be what's going to your matrix as long as you put them in another room that is still close enough for them to be able to use an iPad. And boom, all of a sudden you have a secondary mix coming off the same console that's monitored separately. And
I
so,
do want to play devil's advocate on that a little bit.
yeah, go ahead,
because
please,
You
please.
do need to know your limitations on those apps because a
Yes.
lot of times it's just level adjustment.
It's just levels, right?
You're not going to have EQ adjustment. You're not going to have compression adjustment. You're not going to have all the bells and whistles, but you can easily level balance.
Yes, that
It's
is
a-
a great
it's a start.
point, Michael. That is
It's a great start, though.
Yes, yes.
I know this because we tried. We tried about everything at my church. I did try to take what we had and do it, make it better, which was a really neat experience. And Michael, I've talked to you. I've been
Right.
bugging you for 3 weeks about this, but
Yeah.
I will say I did learn one thing. I actually took the iPad. We have an Allen Heath SQ console, and I took the iPad, went in one of the offices, fired up our worship director's computer, and I was actually monitoring. This is during practice, during a rehearsal we tried, and I was actually monitoring the audio coming through the computer, but I had my mix on in front of me on an iPad. It took me about 10 seconds to figure out that I was mixing in real time, but my audio was delayed,
Yeah.
which is that was an interesting thing.
Right.
I thought, this is not going to work. You move a fader on the iPad and it took 3-4 seconds for me to actually hear the change.
I think that's an important note to make, because when I talked about earlier, when I was referencing my laptop for the live stream, I'm not mixing at that in real time.
Right.
I'm just getting a feel of what it's sounding like,
Yeah,
and it
every
is
live stream is delayed.
10-15 seconds before,
Yeah. For sure.